my language because I do believe that I have called this a protest, which I believe earlier in the day, many of these supporters of the president were engaged in a protest. At this point, it is being called a mob or an insurrection. They are inciting violence, and they have been asked by, and it is illegal to be on the Capitol grounds as they are now. Jeff Pegues, I want to bring in now. And Jeff, can you explain what's happening right now with law enforcement?
Slowly but surely, they are moving some of the demonstrators back off the Capitol building. They're not taking fast action, that's for sure. But you have police officers sort of nudging people toward the exits, if you will. Just in a line of police officers, we saw them just slowly moving people toward the exits. And the people that they were trying to get out off that level of the Capitol building, they were complying. And so that is good news, perhaps from a law enforcement perspective, that things didn't escalate there. But behind me, you still see a lot of people just hanging out there. You do hear chants of USA, USA. And so while some people have cleared out, there are still many others gathering here on the steps of this Capitol building, cheering, waiting perhaps also for law enforcement's next move, because as we've noted, the sun is going down. It is getting darker out here, and we see more. That may be tear gas there. That may be tear gas coming from the center of the Capitol building there, where you see just beyond the crowds that have gathered there, you see this yellow plume. It looks like smoke, but we're being told that it is tear gas.
Okay, stand by, Jeff.
Periodically, we're hearing.
Stand by, Jeff. We're going to stay up on that picture. Stand by. Let me know what you can hear. Just want to quickly bring in Catherine Schweitz. She's a former FBI agent who specializes now in mass events. And Catherine, how does law enforcement get a large crowd like this to disperse? And what do those images that we're showing now tell you about what they're trying to do?
Hi, Nora. It is a challenge. As you can hear, even just for Jeff, you can hear that he's breathing in tear gas, and that's why his voice is the way it sounds. The challenge for law enforcement as darkness is now approaching, because it's sunset right now, is they are going to have to divide and conquer. That's the only way that you can take a large crowd and find a way to disperse it. So the building itself, they have to secure the building perimeter before they can try to empty the building out. And once they secure the perimeter of the building, then they'll be able to send teams into different areas and clear each individual corridor, building, office. And that's when we'll know that the building is secure. But there's also the basement and all the floors above. But for the big crowd outside, you know, a lot of times what happens, and we see in this kind of mob situation, terrorist situation, and people who are inciting riots, is they're all about getting to the site, but they don't really know how to get away from the site. Once they get there, they don't really have a plan. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. It's sunset. They're in a location with no bathroom, no food. It's getting kind of cold. It's going to be down to 30. They've been out all day. And so that will probably take the law enforcement suggestions to disperse.
Catherine, we're seeing the disbursement efforts going on right now. I got to go back to Jeff Pegues, because we hear the sound of a bang and what appears to be either tear gas or something like that. Jeff?
Yeah, we just think, you know, in the last couple of minutes, we're just seeing things escalate a bit here. We have 5, 6, or 7 or so bangs and more smoke. But what is remarkable to me is that we don't see too many in the crowd moving toward the exit. They're just sort of camped out there. No matter what law enforcement does in terms of these flashbangs and tear gas, they're just sort of camped out there. All right, so things have calmed down a little bit. I don't know if law enforcement is going to start another round of these flashbangs.
You can see the law enforcement right on one of the arches of those windows, pushing supporters out. Actually, that's what it looks like, saying "Get out."
Yeah.
It looks like
and
they're crawling out of offices.
Effort.
They're
yes.
crawling out of other offices,
yes.
having already penetrated those rooms by breaking the glass and climbing in. This is a very narrow balcony on the west front, so to get these people off of here, they're going to have to find a staircase to get them to. And you can see people now rubbing their eyes
yes.
and sort of ducking their heads
and
from what is
larger numbers than we've seen before coming out of that central entryway with 2 doors, and you see people withdrawing. It's essentially withdrawing.
Yeah.
Pulling back, quite obviously under threat of arrest and other consequences, and more flashbangs. You can see the chemical irritant, whatever it is. We don't know precisely what it is.
And here comes it. You can see a. You can see. You can hear Jeff say definitely tear gas.
And Jeff, why do you say it's definitely tear gas?
Well, just the color of it. It's this yellow.
Yes.
There's this yellow tint to that smoke.
Correct.
We do have flashbangs mixed in there. I think I got that right. We do have some former law enforcement with us. They're here helping us describe some of the flashes and the bangs that we're seeing. But clearly this is that point that we thought would come, where police are stepping up their efforts to clear the Capitol building. That's what you're seeing right now. And now you see this, it looked like a firecracker, but it's not. It's obviously a flashbang as they try to clear people out.
Jeff Begay, stand by. We're going to continue to monitor this scene. I want to bring in Michael Morell, the former acting director of the CIA and a national security analyst for CBS News. And Mike, thank you. I guess I need to ask you first about, since you have been at the CIA, how our adversaries may be using, looking, watching at these images.
Nora, it's good to talk to you. It's a terrible, terrible day. You know, I think there's 2 things happening overseas. One is what's going through the mind of our adversaries, you know, the Chinese and the Russians and others. And I think they see this as a significant opportunity, right? They'll use it in 2 ways. One is they will show this to their own people, and they will say, this is what democracy brings, so you should actually be happy that we don't live in a democracy. And secondly, they'll share it with the rest of the world with the talking points that this is what the United States is trying to bring the rest of the world when it talks about spreading democracy. So that's an effort to try to reduce our influence. So that's what our adversaries are doing, Nora. What our friends are doing is wondering what is happening. I received a text earlier today from a foreign ambassador to the United States who is back in his capital, and he said he was sitting with his leader trying to explain what was happening here, and he was at a loss for words. He couldn't do it. So I think there's effects here on both our adversaries and on our allies and partners.
Do you believe this effort may have been aided by our adversaries?
I don't think so, Nora. I think this was, made and created here in the United States. You know, we do know that the Russians did not play significantly in the 2020 election, nowhere near as much as they did in 2016. So now I'm afraid we own this one ourselves.
Michael, it's Ed O'Keefe. Good to talk to you, although under these weird circumstances. I'm curious, you served 2 presidents and would have been involved in all sorts of hypothetical exercises, tabletop exercises they call them. Was there ever anything like this gamed out or prepared for?
No, Ed, that's a really good question. And of all the scenarios where we talked about risks to the United States and risks to our democracy and risks to our country, this was never on the list. We never anticipated anything like this. So no, simply not thought about.
And how does this concern you regarding all the other potential vulnerabilities that the country faces right now as we near January 20th? We know there's been concern about, for example, a potential response from Iran after the killing of General Soleimani a year ago, possibly some other kind of event or incident. There's the ongoing cybersecurity breach by Russia that national intelligence agencies have said was caused by them. Is there any reason to believe that, you know, and then there's the pandemic. I mean, is there any other concern that now some other foreign adversary could try to take full advantage of this and cause even more harm?
Yeah, a great question, Ed. I don't think so. The Iranians, for example, they are keeping their head down, right? They are trying to get to a Biden administration without any trouble between them and the United States, right? They want a nuclear deal again with the United States. So I think they're trying to avoid conflict. So I don't think we're going to see anybody try to take advantage of this in the short term. In terms of how I would rank the risks, you know, what's happening today in our own country is at the top of the list, right? If we can't have a healthy democracy, if we can't have a strong democracy, then pretty much nothing else is possible, right? Good policy is not possible. Good foreign policy is not possible. Good national security policy is not possible. You know, your strength as a nation, your national security starts with a strong political system, and we are seeing today that is challenged significantly here in the United States.
No doubt challenged, and at the same time, Michael, you would acknowledge that under threat from foreign governments, multiple foreign adversaries, we did have what was a safe and secure presidential election by all accounts, except by the president, who continues to argue that it was rigged. I have a question for you as someone who, you know, spent a career at the CIA, about the power of words and at the power of messaging, because Leader McCarthy, the top Republican leader in the House, said to us he almost sounded desperate that he had called the president and said he needed to come out and speak before the American people. When the president did address in a taped recording, not live, he once again said that the election had been fraudulent. And then he said essentially to what we may now call a mob, they're no longer protesters, he said at the end, "I love you."
Right.
And I just wonder your take on that, about denouncing, because he had also told them to come and be wild. And I hope that's not too philosophical of a question, but the power of words.
So it's a great question, Nora. You know, in my experience, you know, I worked at the agency for 33 years, and there were dozens and dozens of these kinds of situations that I watched in other countries, where mobs of people rose up to try to turn over a legitimately decided election, right? They wanted to overturn the order. I saw it over and over and over and over again. And one of the necessary conditions for that to happen is for a powerful figure to be saying things that motivate those people who are rioting, right, who are trying to overturn that order. It takes somebody to motivate them, and that's what we have seen with the president.
Michael, if I could, this is Major Garrett. Understanding that you were not participants in any kind of tabletop exercise to game out a scenario like this, but it is nevertheless happening. It is unfolding before our very eyes. You have sat at tables where enormously important and consequential strategies and decisions were made. Honestly, what do you believe are the operational options for the Capitol Police, the National Guard, and those who are trying to clear the Capitol? And what do you think the next 2 or 3 hours ought to look like, and what do you fear they might look like?
Yeah, that's a tough question, Major. You know, I do think that they need to be dispersed. They need to be separated, right? In my experience watching these things overseas, as long as groups of people stay together, they stay strong, right? They stay resolute. It's when they break into very small groups and break into single individuals that they lose that power and they lose that determination. So I think breaking them up is of extreme importance, and keeping them from forming someplace else as a group has to be a top priority.
And final question, Michael, all of this against the backdrop of that extraordinary joint statement in an op-ed by the 10 former secretaries of defense, an effort that was encouraged by former Defense Secretary and Vice President Dick Cheney, that the military would not get involved. I'm sure you have some insight, as do I, based on my own reporting, but it was as if they foreshadowed this type of situation, the concern that this type of insurrection may occur, and to make clear to lawmakers, to the president, and also to the Pentagon that the military would not be engaged. What's your sense?
So when I first saw what was happening at the Capitol today, the first thought I had was these protesters, these rioters, right, this mob, they wanted to create violence in the hope that the president would invoke the Insurrection Act, right, and ask the United States military to come out onto the streets. And I think that's what those former Secretary of Defenses were worried about, is the invoking of that Insurrection Act. And, you know, my understanding, based on the people I talked to, is that the acting Secretary of Defense is a person who could not be counted on to do the right thing in that moment. But the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley, was somebody who could be counted on to do the right thing.
Agreed. And it was said to me, though, however, that while all of them trusted Chairman Milley, that under Secretary Esper, when the president had previously tried to use active duty troops, he was able to slow roll that effort. But that, in your words as well, Michael, with this acting secretary, that would be much more difficult. And then in some ways, it's the civilian leadership that ultimately makes the decision about deploying active duty troops. And as you point out, they were all trying to prevent what would really be a worst case scenario. Yep. Michael, we're always so glad to have you. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome, Nora. Thank you.
Thank you. To let everyone know, it is now 5:18 here in the nation's capital, and the sun has set and the protesters remain. More than 4 hours we've been live on the air covering what is now a mob on Capitol Hill that has forced a lockdown. The House and Senate to go out of session after a joint session was moving forward with the counting of the electoral votes, which was the final step to in the process of naming President-elect Joe Biden as the President of the United States. We don't use the word certify because the states certify the votes, and it's already been certified. So we're very clear and precise in our language here by saying the Congress doesn't certify. It has a very ceremonial role historically. It just counts it, and the Vice President played the role of presider, not decider, and as some have suggested, was almost like the person at the Oscars who just reads the results. As a result of this mob descending on the Capitol after being incited by the President of the United States, his son, and Rudy Giuliani, this has led to this extraordinarily historic, and historic, it sounds like a positive word, but I don't mean that, because we've just never witnessed anything like this in our life, where these supporters of the president have felt emboldened enough to carry this out and place the lives of our D.C. Capitol Police and law enforcement in danger, to place the lives of lawmakers in danger, to place the lives of public servants who engage in the daily act of legislating in danger. We were told by Senator Tammy Duckworth that a number of the senators are all together in a safe and secure location, that a smart and quick-acting staffer grabbed these beautiful wooden boxes that contained the electoral votes and brought them safely and securely to, this is them, look at this incredible piece of history.
Senator
look at
Murphy
these boxes.
Of Oregon they're all in there essentially.
With the senators, they're secure. The electoral votes are secure. The outcome of this presidential election will not be changed. The vice president, who was implored by President Donald Trump to, in his words, be courageous and change it, said, I'm not going to do that. The Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, who has carried out the will of this president in almost every way, today said, we're not going down the death spiral of changing what is a duly elected president of the United States. There was not the widespread type of fraud that would change the results of this election. It was an extraordinary rebuke by Republican leader Mitch McConnell, not only of the president of the United States, but of some of his own Senate colleagues, including Ted Cruz, including Senator Hawley, and others who said, let's go ahead and challenge this. And had those senators, those 13 senators and more than 100 House members not done this, and challenged and objected to the count of these electoral votes, this would have been the ceremonial, usually 20-minute process, and all would be said and done. And yet at this hour, we have what some would call an embarrassing scene for American democracy. What President-elect Joe Biden has said is an attack on the citadel of democracy, an attack on the institution of democracy. And yet our law enforcement now doing their very best job with bullhorns and tear gas to disperse this crowd, because as Senator Duckworth told us, her and her colleagues and some of the senators I know that Ed O'Keefe has spoken with amongst his sources, they want to continue tonight.
They do.
Yeah,
Tell us what you're hearing.
There are several members of the House are back in their offices across the street from the Capitol. Members of the Senate are all together and are waiting to sort of figure out where and when and how exactly they might reconvene. The official word so far is that they don't want to allow them back into the House and Senate chambers until some kind of a major security sweep can occur, not only inside the building, but that they know that outside the crowd has been controlled. And we therefore await some sense of when exactly they can do this. Of course, Major, there's nothing saying they have to do this in the House and Senate chambers. They could decide, and we heard from Senator Duckworth earlier, that they might opt to hold this meeting in some other kind of a conference room. There are very large spaces in the Capitol Visitor Center where they could potentially do this, and there are other large committee rooms as well.
Ed, let me interrupt you for just a second. We have Representative Mike Gallagher on the phone. Congressman, can you hear me, please?
I hear you loud and clear.
This Major Garrett, I'd like you to tell me what you think of today, what you believe will be happening in the next 2 hours, and do you believe the House will reconvene to get back to business in chambers or in the Ways and Means Committee room later on this evening?
I mean, this was absolute insanity. I mean, this was banana republic territory, and it's unacceptable. And I think I've opposed the objection from the start on constitutional grounds, but I think the fundamental problem that no one wanted to say out loud is that the objectors thought that they could have a debate, raise awareness to voter, fraud issues or voting irregularities, but because they wouldn't actually achieve their objective, they all knew that they had no chance of actually overturning the election, but they could have it both ways. But the problem is they gave a lot of people false hope, and they got a lot of people fired up, and now we're seeing the consequences of that play out. And this is just absolutely unacceptable. The president needs to call it off. These people need to stand down. I mean, this is America. This is the United States Capitol, and we're sitting here with our walls barricaded, our doors barricaded. Someone was shot at the U.S. Capitol. The closest thing that I can think of that this reminds me of is the time I spent in Iraq in 2007 and 2008.
Is insurrection too strong a word, Congressman?
The problem is it's like everyone's in a rush to label everyone else a traitor. I just want this to stop, and we have to support the peaceful transition of power. I mean, that's it. We have to accept the fact that the election's over. And the more we traffic in the idea that somehow Congress is going to overturn the results of the election, the more we incite dangerous things like this. And that's just unacceptable. So it's over. I wish Republicans had won. It sucks. I get it. But, there are consequences to going down this road.
Congressman Gallagher, it's Ed O'Keefe of CBS News. Thank you again for joining us. As you said, you're not one of those objecting to the results of the Electoral College. You were among the Republicans who reluctantly accept these results and want to move on. I know you made a fair point about not ascribing titles and blame and whatnot, but it does seem like your party especially, and your House conference most of all, is going to have a serious conversation with itself about what it has allowed to occur today. And I just wonder whether you think that conversation will happen, could happen, and what might transpire.
Well, the conversation is going to happen in the next few hours. And the objectors are going to have to ask themselves whether they seriously want to persist in their objection after what they've seen today. And again, knowing that what they're doing has no chance of being successful, that it is all a stunt. I mean, that's a pretty cynical ploy right there. So at a minimum, when we get back together at a conference, I think we all have to say we're not going to persist in the objection. We support the peaceful transfer of power, and we're done perpetuating this fiction that somehow Congress has the authority to overturn the results of the states.
Congressman, to what degree have you been communicated with by leadership about what will happen tonight? Will you reconvene? I've been told that it's possible that the House may reconvene, not in the chamber itself, but in the Ways and Means Committee room.
If that message came down, I missed it. I haven't gotten that. So, you know, I've heard nothing formally from leadership right now. I would imagine they're trying to figure it out. And all the focus right now is just on making sure this thing doesn't escalate any further, making sure that the, now violent protesters disband, abide by the curfew. But I have not heard anything about when we're going to reconvene.
Do you believe it's necessary for Congress to send a message that it get back to business as soon as possible?
Yes, 100%. I think it's necessary for Congress to send the message that we support the peaceful transition of power and that we, as the federal government, don't have the right to overturn the will of the states and, by extension, the American people. That is sort of Schoolhouse Rock Constitution 101.
Congressman Mike Gallagher, we thank you so very much for joining us. Chip Reed, I believe, is near Capitol Hill and has some new information to share with us. Chip?
Yeah, I'm just on Constitution Avenue, just outside the Senate. Two things here. Number one, there were about a group of about 20 media with cameras at the Senate swamp site, which you are certainly well familiar with, just out at the bottom of the Senate steps. And out of nowhere, we were suddenly surrounded by about 40 or 50 protesters who started chanting things that I can't repeat about the media on TV. They started throwing bottles. They started pushing people. They picked up the metal fences that we were surrounded by and throwing them at us. And we, for our own safety, evacuated the area, but we did stay long enough to get some pretty good video of them smashing the equipment, cameras, sound equipment, everything they could get their hands on. They just completely took over that spot as they shouted USA, USA, and God bless America. Now I'm just across the street at the Russell Senate Office Building, and I just saw a column of, I would estimate, between 120 and 150 police officers. And by the way, the Capitol grounds is now completely surrounded by police, and there are helicopters above. And I saw this column of 120 to 150 police officers walking three abreast, all of them in helmets and flak jackets, walking down Constitution Avenue and turned in the direction of the Capitol grounds. You know, there is a 6 o'clock curfew in Washington. They may be timing some kind of move, this might suggest that, to start clearing the Capitol grounds of these protesters in time for that, or sometime in the vicinity of that 6 o'clock curfew.
Chip, I must ask you, were you injured at all in this fracas? Were any of our colleagues injured? And where were the police? Where were the police? Did you have any sense that you could or would be protected?
There were no police around us. We were on our own. In fact, I remember one of the protesters standing next to me said, the police don't care about you guys. They're only protecting the senators. You're on your own, buddy. And so we hightailed it out of there. They were absolutely ferociously angry at the media, I must say, picking out some of the media enterprises by name. And it was a scary moment, I've got to say. You know, I had a flak jacket and a helmet with me. The last time I wore a flak jacket and a helmet, well, a whole series of times, was when I spent a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it is so disturbing to have to wear a helmet and a flak jacket on the grounds of the United States Capitol.
Heartbreaking.
And to hear you say that, Chip, I know as someone who's worked on Capitol Hill for many years, it's sad to see this happening at this hour, to have to be wearing a flak jacket and a helmet, not only anywhere in the United States of America, but on near our United States Capitol. And that's what's happening at this hour. You have law enforcement descending on the U.S. Capitol to try and disperse this crowd from the Capitol. It is nightfall now here in Washington, D.C. The mayor of the District of Columbia, Mayor Muriel Bowser, has ordered a citywide 6 p.m. curfew. It's my understanding that it has been communicated to protesters that that curfew will be enforced by arrest. It appears they have already used tear gas and other materials. I want to bring in Jeff Pegues, who is right there on the scene. And Jeff, has that messaging had any effect?
Slowly but surely, I think it is having an effect out here, Nora. We see a line of police officers in the rotunda here pushing the crowd of protesters back. And in fact, if you look here to my left, you will see that more of the protesters are streaming from this area, which suggests that police are being more successful in their efforts to clear this Capitol area. Now that the sun has gone down, nightfall has come, and that curfew that you mentioned is fast approaching. So their efforts are paying off a little bit more. We see that there are stragglers there waving their American flag, sometimes chanting USA, USA. But certainly law enforcement, as you noted, has picked up the pace in terms of getting this area cleared.
Jeff Pegues, who is right there just off the west front of the Capitol, where 2 weeks from now we'll be covering the inauguration of President-elect Joe Biden, which is what today was supposed to be about. Really a ceremonial effort in a joint session of Congress to count the electoral votes, and then tens of thousands of Trump supporters coming from the White House, incited by the President of the United States and encouraged to incite violence. And that's exactly what they carried out. There has been violence on Capitol Hill. A woman shot, transported to the hospital in critical condition. Additional we're not clear who they are. One person who was trying to climb the walls also fell and fractured some bones, transported. A number of injuries reported by the D.C. Metro Police, who are now on the scenes, aided by members of the National Guard. We've seen members of the FBI elite unit inside the Capitol. What they're trying to do is, we're seeing outside the Capitol. We don't have cameras inside. What they're also trying to do is essentially clear step by step inside the Capitol. And
room by room, corridor by corridor.
And every office building as well.
And every office building, because as Senator Tammy Duckworth and other lawmakers we've spoken with today told us, they want to keep going.
And I just heard from another senator who says they still don't know when, where, or how they might reconvene tonight, but they certainly want to.
Stick and stay.
And I think, do we have that shot of the west front of the Capitol again? With the expansive look at the lawn?
That right there you can see is...
This is Pennsylvania Avenue, it's hard to tell.
Control room, do we have a sense of where exactly that is?
Either way, what we were conveying with images a little while ago is that while this is an intense crowd, it is not a large crowd at this point.
It has begun to thin, it appears, and with the exception of what Chip Reed just reported to us, a full-on assault of members of the media on the east front near the swamp site. That's an area just at the foot of the Senate stairs on the east front of the Capitol. That area is largely empty, it appears, by all the video shots that we've seen, the live footage. So it appears what remains of the crowd has concentrated to the degree it has on the west front. And I would just point out that for those who were chanting God bless America and USA, USA, that is utterly incompatible with assaulting members of the media. Your First Amendment right to assembly is guaranteed in the Constitution. So is the free press. And they are not at odds. They're only at odds when you act like criminals, as those people who tried to attack Chip Reed, our other colleagues, and destroy their equipment did just moments ago.
It's an excellent point. And the freedom of the press and the freedom to assemble and others was enshrined in the First Amendment, not the 11th Amendment,
nope.
The First Amendment, for a very reason, which was to, as the framers talked about, to hold public powerful officials accountable, as Madison talked about. Showing you now live pictures. Come on, guys, go home. You hear the Metro Police trying as peacefully as possible. Let's listen into this.
We got a small criminal class that's running this country. Y'all don't come in, man. You stand with us. We're going to church on Sunday. We got a big guys. Let's go. Love you guys. We still support you.
Not only supporters of the president, but supporters of Jesus gathered as well, concerned about and protesting, which is a right, but this has gone beyond protesting, as has now placed the lives of law enforcement and others in danger, as well as the destruction to our federal property and disrupted the work of lawmakers and diligent public servants.
And you heard, Nora, the audience heard one of the protesters as he walked away say there's a small criminal class that runs this country. That is an embedded grievance that Donald Trump did not invent, let us be honest, but as a candidate and as president, he has pointed to and suggested is real and is given a sense to these people who held that grievance that it's real. And he's the only alternative to it.
Listen just a minute.
What happens when we have the power and you guys are getting pushed down? You guys don't want us with your weapons.
And we should tip our hats to the D.C. police, who frankly have put up with a lot of this over the past year, whether it's pro or anti-Trump supporters, the Black Lives Matter protests that were held. This is a police force that has been worn pretty thin and worked pretty hard dealing with situations like this across the nation's capital for last.
We should update. We now have some definitive information on that. We're being told there are 1,100 D.C. National Guard that have been mobilized, 200 Virginia state troopers, and an unknown number of Virginia National Guard that have all been sent to D.C. at the mayor's request. 500 Maryland National Guard and state troopers. Montgomery County Police have sent 53 members of their special events response team, an all hands on deck. Look at this picture as the Capitol is lit up bright tonight to give law enforcement a clear picture and to remove those. And the reason, as Alan He, our Capitol Hill reporter who just spoke with Senator Manchin, he said to Senator Manchin, what's the plan for tonight? And Senator Manchin told Alan He, we plan as soon as they get everything cleared, but we're going to go back and do our business. And Alan said in the Capitol tonight, and Senator Manchin said, we sure hope so. So we'll say whatever it takes. These thugs are not running us off. That from the senator from West Virginia.
As we discussed many hours ago, there would be an institutional imperative to send a signal. The Capitol is lit up not just to aid law enforcement in the removal of these insurrectionists and mob violence committers, but also to look the way it does, to be a shining light symbolically and quite genuinely on Capitol Hill. It is the place that when you're in Washington, you see from a great distance. It is inspiring. It's always been inspiring to me. I consider it the most beautiful building in America. I really do. I love to be inside that building. Our whole story of America is there, both in art and in architectural representation. And it's lit up for two reasons: to help law enforcement, but also to be a symbol to the country. It will endure. And those lawmakers want to get back to that enduring part of it, getting back to the work and not being intimidated, not being scared away by an angry, violent, and criminal mob, though be it small.
It is, I agree, the most beautiful building in Washington. Atop it sits Lady Liberty, a woman, the highest point in Washington, statue built by slaves. And now, today, we learned that the first black senator from the South will represent the South in a true changing of America.
Georgia, yes, from Georgia, yes.
It's funny, while we sit here, it seems so insignificant, but when the day began, it was quite significant. The Democrats won both those seats in Georgia. There is now Democratic.
Have we actually announced that we've called it?
Yes, we have.
I know.
We have it on the air.
No, but can we do that?
Major, I actually did ask a little while ago. It was thought that we should stay in the moment here, but I know because yes, we missed the boards. Yes, that moment about just what happened, because this is just what we're witnessing live in the moment. We should stay, but it is that has eclipsed in some ways what is a significant shift of power. And that's why there was over $500 million spent on those 2 Senate races, because it controls the future of this country. Legislatively, I mean, it's the most very extremely powerful, which is why Congress, there was talk that, that Wall Street, that the markets would tank as a result if Democrats took control. They did not. But we are reporting at this hour, and had just a few hours ago, that the Democratic candidate for the Senate, John Ossoff, who is a 33-year-old documentary filmmaker, has defeated the incumbent Senator David Perdue in what has been now is at about 30,000 votes there. We had earlier called in the middle of the night for the other Democrat running in that race, Reverend Warnock, who is the pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Martin Luther King once presided, and he defeated the not the acting senator, but the
she replaced Johnny Isaacs, Kelly Loeffler, filling out the unexpired term of Johnny Isaacs.
She was never an elected senator. She was just filling out an expired term of Kelly Loeffler.
And running for the opportunity to do that, so and was defeated.
Now CBS News projects that Democrats hold 50 seats in the United States Senate, as do Republicans. And with the vice president-elect a Democrat, she would cast the tie-breaking vote, which would give them the majority. We want to return now to Capitol Hill and see exactly what's happening there, because you see law enforcement trying to disperse protesters. We are now just 18 minutes away from 6 o'clock. That is the curfew that has been enacted by the mayor of the District of Columbia, which she has made clear will be enforced by arrests. My guess is the jails may be full tonight, given the number of protesters still out there. And Chris Van Cleve has been in the crowds. Chris, tell us what you're seeing about the efforts to disperse these protesters.
Well, Nora, we're on the western front of the Capitol here. You can see it's a much different scene than when we last spoke to you. A lot fewer people here. The Capitol Police have deployed a series of flashbangs, some smoke. Some people were complaining about pepper spray or tear gas as well. That has certainly helped thin the numbers of people that are out front of the Capitol here. There's still a number of people right up along the Capitol base there that are continuing to protest. But for all the talk about what happened inside the Capitol today, a lot of the people that gathered out here did so peacefully. They were here to protest, here to be heard. And many of the folks were just as surprised to hear about what transpired inside the Capitol as everyone watching at home. We have seen not only Montgomery County Police, but a large number of Fairfax County, Virginia police come into the Capitol area here as they've been moving forces into the area, not only from D.C., but Maryland, Virginia. And if you talk about that curfew that is coming up here in a few minutes, it's been quite some time since where we have seen any police officers, at least moving in this area. I can see some flashing lights in the distance. Most notable difference at this point, certainly the temperature has come down. What is happening outside the Capitol appears to be a peaceful protest as people are filing out. Where they go from here is an open question. D.C. has a curfew that will go into effect at 6 o'clock. Certainly, people are being encouraged to go home or go back to their hotels. But that remains a bit of an open question, where the crowd from here is going. Nora?
Right, and Chris Van Cleve, as you note, as Virginia has been involved in as well, Governor Northam, at the request of Alexandria, Virginia, which is just right across the river, where probably some protesters could be staying. I shouldn't say protesters, part of this mob group now we're calling them, are staying. They're also imposing a 6 p.m. curfew there as well, and a state of emergency in Virginia so that they can continue to respond and help in the nation's capital.
And the use of the bullhorns to notify them is to give basically the district and all the police there the legal authority to say, we warned you repeatedly. If you stay here, you will be arrested. And this will not be a contestable municipal misdemeanor situation. You will be arrested because we are warning you. If you stay here, you will be arrested. If you disperse, you will not be. And that's a means, kind of the earliest, most gentle way to try to create crowd dispersal. Warn them repeatedly, give them fair notice, and then see if they withdraw. And as they withdraw, you begin to create a calmer situation. We are beginning to see that begin to materialize, which, I don't want to get ahead of this, might be a positive sign.
We've got some breaking news right now. Let's go to Nancy Cordes on Capitol Hill. Nancy, what are you hearing?
Nora, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, who is a Democrat from Michigan and a close ally of Speaker Pelosi, has just tweeted that they have been told that the Capitol is now secure, the inside at least, and that they should now get back to fulfilling their duty of certifying the 2020 election. If that is true, if the entire Capitol complex is now secure, that is pretty remarkable because there are an endless number of corridors and offices and nooks and crannies and hideaways that would need to be checked to ensure that there is no one left inside this complex who doesn't belong here. I mean, we have been seeing images all day long of protesters or mob members, whatever you want to call them, toting out podiums. We saw one guy with his feet propped up on Nancy Pelosi's desk. So people clearly fanned out across the Capitol complex. But Debbie Dingell is a reliable individual who I know you know well as well. And I can tell you from talking to lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, they really do want to get back to work tonight to finish ratifying these Electoral College results, both because they know that this is a job that needs to be completed and because they want to show that Congress is not going to be intimidated, cowed, delayed from doing important work by an unruly mob like this. So there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes right now to figure out exactly where and when they would be able to resume safely. But for hours now, various lawmakers, their aides, have just sort of been gathering in their offices, essentially waiting for more word about what is going to happen next. The one person we haven't heard from at all is Senate Leader Mitch McConnell. He has not released a statement. He hasn't come out anywhere and spoken on camera since his speech on the Senate floor earlier this afternoon. And of course, we're all waiting to hear what he has to say and what House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has to say about what's going to happen next. We're just now hearing some kind of announcement over the loudspeaker here in one of the Senate office buildings. It's a little bit hard to make out what it is they're saying. They may be warning individuals about this impending curfew, but this is the first time we've heard a message like this inside the office building today.
You're in the Russell Senate office building, Nancy, which is just to the north of the Capitol. Hey, one question. You mentioned we hadn't heard from Leader McConnell. Do we know the whereabouts of Speaker Pelosi? And do we have any sense that House and Senate leaders have spoken today about what to do?
We have not gotten any information from their aides about where exactly they are, where they were taken initially and where they are now. They've given us absolutely no information. In fact, I haven't even heard back from Leader McConnell's aides when I have texted them repeatedly to find out what's going on. I've talked to many other aides and lawmakers, but not McConnell's office itself. I think that there's no question that he's pretty busy right now. He's both trying to figure out whether and how they can resurrect this ratification process safely. But also remember, he's got to deal with an insurrection within his own party. These 13, 14, 15 Republican senators who, at least earlier today, wanted to challenge the Electoral College results. What are they going to do now? Have they had a change of heart? Are they at least paring back the number of states that they want to challenge? And so these are the kinds of things that he needs to really get a feel for before he can decide what his next move is.
We are reaching an important, thank you, Nancy Cordes. We are reaching an important moment. We are now just 10 minutes away from the D.C. curfew at 6 p.m., which is to be enforced by arrest. You can see the police, these pictures now, pushing back this mob, telling them to go home. Chris Van Cleve is right there. Chris?
Well, Nora, the group of people we were talking about up at the base of the Capitol, you can see here the police. If you pan over, you can see the police here with their riot shields and their helmets have pushed the crowd back to the street now, completely clearing the west lawn of the Capitol. These demonstrators, these protesters are not happy about it. They have been hurling a lot of obscenities at the police as they've been pushed back. They feel they have the right to be on the Capitol grounds. They see it as public property and that they should be able to be there. The police, and these look like Fairfax County, Virginia police uniforms, have moved the people back, trying to get people to go home. Of course, we're just minutes away from D.C. enforcing a curfew. Doesn't sound like all of these folks realize that there's a curfew that's been put into effect either. So, but you can hear the yelling. That's being directed at the police here. And this is, Nora, I was saying just minutes ago, we hadn't seen police in quite some time. It's clear they were massing to move people out. And now we see an awful lot of police officers. And these folks are in gas masks. They're in helmets. They've got body armor on and shields. This is a very clear message for folks to disperse. Nora?
Yeah, and if people want to compare these images to foreign countries, remember that in a foreign country, most of those protesters or that mob would have been shot dead by now. Right. That's the difference with America, the United States of America, that the law enforcement in this instance is trying to peacefully de-escalate and push them back. Now, there are exceptions to that, as we know, and different people are treated differently by the police. That has been witnessed this year, and we've covered those stories. But at this moment, you see what is a job by law enforcement from all around what we call the DMV, which is D.C., Maryland, Virginia effort, trying to secure the United States Capitol so that they can continue with the work of the day.
Chris, are you still there? It's Ed.
Yes, Nora, I'm here.
It's Ed, Chris. I'm curious, who are these people out on the streets? And are they predominantly out-of-towners? Are they men? Are they women? Are they young? Did they come from different parts of the country? Do we have any sense of that?
Yeah, most of the people we talked to today were folks that were from out of town. One man as far away as Montana, another came in from Los Angeles, one from West Virginia. In fact, one of the people that was walking away from here a few minutes ago was asking, where is the town hall? If they've got a curfew, I want to protest at the town hall. So, and also, D.C.
They're not that far from it.
Is a heavily right, they're not far. D.C. is a heavily Democratic community. The people that live in Washington, D.C. Were not, by and large, Trump supporters. So it doesn't surprise me that you saw people coming from outside of the area. We know that flights into D.C. last night were very full, and that they had a lot of Trump supporters on them. Based on videos and things that were posted to social media. So this is a lot of out-of-towners. We saw everything from some very, very old to people that had brought their children out here and sort of everywhere in between.
Looks like,
a lot of
Chris,
the folks,
it looks like largely a white male crowd.
Yeah, it was a predominantly white crowd. There was a mix of men and women, but predominantly white men. I think that's a fair thing to say about the crowd today. The folks that we talked to would make the point that they said, look, we're the good Midwestern folks who feel like we haven't been heard, they're hoping their message was heard today, and they wanted. I was talking to a woman actually right about here, right before the police got here, and she was questioning who the bad actors were that actually went into the Capitol, who that mob was, because she said that doesn't sound like Trump supporters, and she was shaking her head at it too.
We are now just 5 minutes away from a curfew in our nation's capital, following a day in which a mob has stormed our nation's capital. And inflamed all by angry Trump speech earlier in the day and his supporters. We heard from the president-elect Joe Biden, who called on Trump to demand an end to this siege. President Trump, in a videotaped message, then said to the crowd, go home and we love you, and once again repeating the falsehood that there had been a fraudulent election. A number of senators and lawmakers still on Capitol Hill. Earlier we had heard that they were evacuated, but to be clear, we've heard they're still there. They're actually, for the most part, our understanding is that they're on Capitol Hill, that they plan to act tonight. to carry out what was the business earlier in the day. And now you can see what an extraordinary picture right there. Law enforcement in front of a lit up U.S. Capitol.
Right. And to Chris's point from a moment ago, there might be those who will be disbelieving that this was Trump supporters who stormed the Capitol. It can be unambiguously stated that it was. They draped Trump flags on the Capitol, adorning it as if they were taking it over by some manner of force. It strikes me, Nora, that we ought to pause for a second and remember what the president said at his acceptance speech of the Republican nomination standing in front of the White House back in August. He said that Republicans were the party of law and order, that Democrats, if elected to the president and other seats in Congress, would unleash lawlessness in our country, and they would inflict mob violence on monuments, on sacred parts of the American community, and in our streets. Just take that in for a second. Remember those words from the president. He said them. He said those were the stakes, at least in part, of this presidential election. That Democrats would unleash mobs that would attack our most sacred values, institutions, and streets of our country. He didn't say it once, he said it more than once. One other point, Nora, and I think you were beginning to allude to it. All of us have covered, at one dimension or another, the new quest for social justice in this country, in the sense that sometimes the application of police force is disproportionate and affects people of color differently. People that I've gotten to know in that community have texted me today saying to me, Major, if this group, this assemblage, was all people of color and doing exactly the same thing, they would have been treated manifestly differently, and it would have been much uglier.
Yeah.
I think that's something that we should put on the table and at least take note of.
Absolutely. And in other corners of social media, because a lot of this was ginned up on social media, but on other corners of social media today, where these people don't go, there are a lot of people saying that. That if this even had a hint of diversity to it, it would have been handled different. Because overwhelmingly, we've seen it with our own eyes all day, folks. This is a predominantly white crowd, and there are people across the country who are observing this and thinking it might have gone a little different.
True or not, it's an emotion that I think, based on what you've seen, what's been texted to me, has to be regarded as real and part of this fabric that is strained and stressed in this country.
The police chief of Washington, D.C. says that these pro-Trump mob has deployed chemical irritants on police. They did earlier in the day in order to break into the United States Capitol. They had declared the scene a riot after one person, a woman, was shot inside the Capitol. Short time ago, he said that 13 arrests have been made, all people from outside the area. And the mayor of the District of Columbia, Muriel Bowser, has said the behavior of those on the Capitol Hill was shameful, unpatriotic, and above all, unlawful, and that this behavior will not be tolerated. And there you hear law enforcement now essentially clearing the west front and east front of the Capitol. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill have been told that the Capitol is now secure. The curfew now just 2 minutes away in the District of Columbia. And as you can see, the heavy police and ambulance presence on Capitol Hill, we can expect now, and I'm curious what's happening inside the control center that is directing all of this law enforcement about how strict they will be in terms of arrests. This crowd will now disperse into the district, which has banned indoor dining. You cannot go inside a bar and have a cocktail. That's just not permitted, because the first time now, we're going to mention this, there is a pandemic raging across America. D.C. has not been one of the worst places because it has enforced a very strict mask mandate policy, and of course is now under a policy of no indoor dining in many.
And was very limited even when it extended that.
Right.
A little news from congressional leadership. A lot of the clamoring to reconvene has come from rank and file members throughout the day, but not the leaders who set the agenda. Senator McConnell, the Republican leader, is encouraging fellow senators that they will resume tonight at some point in order to project strength after what went on today. And Congressman Jim Clyburn, the House Majority Whip, the lead vote counter for House Democrats, says that they will resume tonight, continue the business he uses the incorrect word, certifying the Electoral College votes, but a signal from House leaders that run the floor that they will reconvene.
You know, and I'm gobsmacked now reading the statement by former President George W. Bush, who has just put out a statement saying this is how election results are disputed in a banana republic, not our democratic republic. I am appalled by the reckless behavior of some political leaders since the election and by the lack of respect shown today for our institutions. Appalled by the reckless behavior of some political leaders. That is a rebuke of Senator Ted Cruz. That's a rebuke of Senator Hawley. Am I incorrect in reading it that way?
Nope.
I just think that...
and if I remember...
Well, it's a rebuke of the current office holder.
It should also be noted that former President George W. Bush yesterday put out a statement that he would be attending the inauguration of President-elect Joe Biden, a signal that he believes a peaceful transition of power should occur. He does not put any weight into these baseless charges of either election fraud or rigging.
And in his words, witnessing the peaceful transfer of power in America never grows old.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then later in that statement, he says, to those who are disappointed in the results of the election, our country is more important than the politics of the moment. Let the officials elected by the people fulfill their duties and represent our voices in peace and safety. May God continue to bless the United States of America.
And that statement from the former president echoes something that Mike Gallagher told us just a little while ago, that it was his opinion, Republican member of the House, that some of his colleagues thought that they were just playing with small kindling, that this really wouldn't go anywhere, and that they were just associating themselves with a sense of anger in the country and mistrust of the election, but that they were essentially using procedural blanks, that it wasn't live ammo. And his point is, actually, it was, and you should have known better. And not only were you incautious, but you are partially to blame for that which we have seen play out on the United States Capitol. Quite obviously, a set of circumstances none of us, in our wildest and darkest imaginings, could have imagined.
One of the scenes that we saw today was not only members of the House, but members of the Senate on their knees with gas masks on, with bags over their heads, as they watched Capitol Police, guns drawn, trying to push back protesters. On the phone is Congresswoman Susan Wild. She is a Democrat from Pennsylvania. And Congresswoman, tell us what today was like for you.
It was a very emotional and difficult day. It still is. It's possibly the most frightening thing that I've ever gone through in my lifetime. And it was a day that will last in our memories for a very long time. And I'm deeply afraid for what it means for the future of our democracy.
What did you witness?
I was seated in the House gallery while the Arizona objectors were being heard. As a member of the Pennsylvania delegation, we were scheduled to have our objections and responses heard next. I was planning to speak during that, so I was just up in the gallery waiting. We were all on pretty high alert because we were aware of the protests outside, and things started to get very, very ramped up. At one point, there was commotion out in the hallway outside of the gallery, and the Capitol Police came in and started locking us in, barricading the doors. Obviously, that was a very frightening, intense situation. The Speaker of the House and a few others in leadership were removed from the House floor. Somebody came, I think somebody from the Sergeant-at-Arms came over the microphone and told people to look under their chairs for gas masks that were encased under there, which we did. And then we were told to sit and be quiet for a long time. I don't have any concept of how long. And then suddenly we were told to evacuate. And because of where I was in the gallery, we could only evacuate through one door, which was clear on the other side of the House floor. And so I and about 15 or 20 other members were among the last. And then all of a sudden, they wouldn't let us evacuate anymore. They barricaded the doors and said there were intruders again in the hallway. And the next thing I knew, there was glass breaking and shots being fired, and we were told to get down. And then I don't know how long that lasted. I honestly don't remember. And then at some point, they were able to secure the hallway again, and we were able to evacuate.
Where did you stay securely after all of this happened?
Well, I'm still where we were taken, but we're not at liberty to disclose where we are. There's about 300 to 400 of us in one location, and we've been here ever since we were evacuated.
And all of you are packed in there together?
Yes.
Are you concerned about coronavirus?
Very much so. It's what I would call a COVID super spreader event. About half of the people in the room are not wearing masks, even though they've been offered surgical masks. They've refused to wear them.
Who are these people?
People from the Republican delegation. Not all of them by any means. I don't mean to suggest that they all have, but some of the newer members from this that are freshmen this year are openly flaunting that they will not wear a mask and refusing to put a mask on.
And just as a reminder, Congresswoman, are all members of Congress required to be tested?
We're not required to be tested, but testing is readily available every day that Congress is in session. And most of us take advantage of that, at least when we first get to D.C. and before we go back to our respective districts.
So you predict a number of lawmakers may contract coronavirus after this event?
I'm not going to predict anything, but it's certainly exactly this kind of situation that we've been told by the medical doctors not to be in. Close proximity, especially with people that aren't wearing masks. I mean, we weren't even allowed to get together with our families for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and now we're in a room with people who are flaunting the rules and very much crowded in here.
I'm sorry to hear that, Congresswoman. I hope that you are able to stay safe. I must ask you, we've heard now from the former President George W. Bush, who has called this mob attack on the Capitol an insurrection. He didn't even call it disgraceful. He rebuked the reckless behavior, he said, of lawmakers who engaged in these objections. How would you characterize what happened today?
I hadn't heard that because we don't have access to television in here, but I am glad to hear that President Bush has made that statement. I agree with him completely. I think, frankly, we've been told that we are going to go back either to the House floor or some other location in the near future, and meaning today, to resume the business at hand of approving the electors.
We have a new tweet.
I would like to see the objectors withdraw their objections, but I'm quite certain that they won't be doing so, and that we'll probably be here late into the evening or the early morning hours while we finish the business at hand. And I think he's absolutely right. I think President Bush is absolutely right.
Congresswoman Susan Wild of Pennsylvania, thank you for joining us and as describing how a number of lawmakers are all packed in together at what she called a potential super spreader event of coronavirus, with Republican lawmakers not wearing masks as all of them wait to take the next step and potentially fulfill the duties that are outlined within U.S. law about counting the electoral votes. We should once again just let everyone know that the D.C. curfew is now in effect. The law enforcement has enforced the securing of the United States Capitol. You can see law enforcement has cleared the west front of the Capitol. They have been told that inside the Capitol is secure, and yet the lawmakers are still secluded and kept in this secure area.
Although a group of them, the Republican Senate objectors, or those that were planning to object today, are now meeting separate from the rest of the Senate. They were being held in a holding room. We're getting pool reports of reporters who split up to monitor the place, and one of them tells us that Senators Braun of Indiana, Ted Cruz of Texas, Josh Hawley of Missouri, and others are meeting in a separate room together outside of the larger room where the rest of the Senate's being held. These are the folks that have to signal to the rest of the Senate how far and to what extent they want to take the objections.
What their intentions are.
And so we'll see whether they give us some sense of a path forward. That would help hasten things or give us a sense this could still take a while.
And yet the words of former President George W. Bush, who said he is appalled by the reckless behavior of some political leaders since the election and by the lack of respect shown today for our institutions, our traditions, and our law enforcement. He called this a congressionally mandated meeting of Congress and that it should move forward and not be inflamed by falsehoods and false hopes, in his words.
So these senators that Ed just referred to have a very big decision to make, because if they cease objecting to any state, Arizona or any future state, then the objection heard from a House member is not carried forward. There is no debate. It is ruled out of order. That has happened before. Matter of fact, the last time it happened, former Vice President Biden was the one to gavel those objections from Democrats from the House floor out of order because they were not endorsed or seconded by a senator. If these senators withdraw and basically say, you know what, we're not going to object to this, then this process on the procedures laid out under law would not go forward in any robust way. House members would object, they would be ruled out of order, there would be no 2 hours of debate for each chamber, and this process would move much more as it has in the past. It is an enormous consequential moment for these senators, because if they continue with this, they have to explain on what basis are they continuing to object, and in any way, shape, or form are they fueling that which we saw play out unimaginably and grotesquely in the Capitol today.
But couldn't they be fueling it if they don't do something at this point? If they don't follow through with at least some of it? Couldn't these people come right back tonight and try to do it again? That's going to be part of the calculation, potentially.
There is a way to describe what would be happening. We thought about this. We now say that it has fueled something that we consider to be out of control and uncontrollable. We are going to stick with the Constitution. We ask you to do the same, and if you don't, you will be in violation of the law and the spirit of not only federalism but constitutionalism, and we essentially, because of your actions, are withdrawing. That is one option for them. As you quite accurately point out, Ed, another political option is to say, no, we're going to continue this, but don't be as aggressive. Do you think, and does anyone at this table think, that puts the genie anywhere closer back in the bottle? I have my doubts.
And we have some breaking news and some sad news to share with you. CBS News has learned that the woman who was shot earlier inside the Capitol has died, per law enforcement. It is not clear who that woman is, but we showed you that disturbing video earlier that she has sadly passed. And so this violent mob that has led to a confrontation with law enforcement and Capitol Police has led to at least one death, multiple arrests, and also multiple others transported to hospitals for a number of different injuries. But we have that update for you at this hour. There is also, because of what has happened and the seriousness of what has happened, former President George W. Bush saying it's more like what happens in a banana republic, not a democratic republic. There are now calls for Vice President Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment, even though there are just 2 weeks left in President Trump's term. I want to bring in David Becker, our election law expert, to explain what that means and why those calls are taking place. David?
Well, I think the calls are understandable, given right now there might be questions about whether the president is fit to remain in office during the next 2 weeks, given his incitement to violence, his inability to really de-stoke the grievances that he's been stoking for so long. And how the 25th Amendment would work is if it's deemed by the vice president and majority of the cabinet that the president is not able to fulfill his duties, they then send a letter to Congress, and the vice president becomes acting president for a period of time until they withdraw the letter, or the president sends another letter saying, I actually can fulfill my duties. Then the vice president and the majority of the cabinet could again send a letter making their case for him to be removed from office. That's one possibility, of course. I think we've also seen some calls from members of Congress to impeach the president again. And of course, that can happen at any time. He could be impeached, and then if the articles of impeachment are passed by the House, the trial would go to the Senate, and that trial in the Senate could be very, very quick as well. Those are two options given the circumstances we now see. Whether that's the right way to go, I think, is a really open question right now. But what we've seen today is one of the most shameful episodes in modern American history, so it's understandable.
I also want to ask you, David, too, because there's also some critics today of companies like Twitter and Facebook, and saying that those social media companies have failed to prevent the misinformation, the spread of misinformation that has led to this chaos and this insurrection today.
Yeah, that's a great point, Nora. This is, we no longer share a common reality. We have what we know is fact, which is that this was the most secure, transparent, scrutinized election we've ever held in American history, the highest turnout we've ever had. And yet on issues like vaccines and COVID and international relations and so many other issues, we no longer share a common reality, and certainly social media plays a role in that. There's going to need to be a very long conversation, and it needs to be bipartisan, and it's not going to be solved right away, about how disinformation, how social media, and even perhaps how mental health issues all play into these issues right now, to get people riled up like this over an election that was so successful, where so many people participated, to the point where they would storm the Capitol. A woman has died tonight. This should cause some serious soul searching.
And we should point out that these calls for possibly invoking the 25th Amendment aren't just coming from liberal Democratic lawmakers, but among other groups, the National Association of Manufacturers, a major business group in this country,
wow,
issued a statement saying, quote, Vice President Pence, who was evacuated from the Capitol, should seriously consider working with the cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment to preserve democracy. This is not the vision of America that manufacturers believe in and work so hard to defend. Say across America today, millions of manufacturing workers are helping our nation fight the deadly pandemic that's already taken hundreds of thousands of lives. We're trying to rebuild the economy, and in their belief, they think the president's distracting from that.
To use a generalization, these are not hand-wringing academics. These are industrialists.
Yes.
These are people who are at the core of the manufacturing part of America, historic economic backbone, and they see a general sense of unease, instability, and unpredictability about the future of the U.S. economy. And that is an extraordinary statement from them to say this needs to be thought about in serious ways.
Yeah, yeah. And then in calls for impeachment coming from people like Ilhan Omar, the Minnesota congresswoman. But it was the manufacturers saying this that brought some intrigue to our attention.
We've also now heard from the acting Secretary of Defense, Chris Miller, who has put out a statement saying that along with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, that they spoke together with the Vice President, Speaker Pelosi, Leader McConnell, Senator Schumer, about the situation on the Capitol, and activated the D.C. National Guard to assist federal and local law enforcement. I can see that you know, Major, where I'm going with this, is that been notably absent from this is the President of the United States.
Correct. That is
why not? He's the president. He's been left out of this
public
decision-making.
statement illustrating the decision made by the Vice President on this. And that is an exercise of power to enlarge the law enforcement presence to quell this uprising. The senior-most member of the Trump administration to ratify that was the Vice President. That gets us a little bit farther down the road operationally to this conversation we were just having about who's exercising power. The Vice President just exercised power in consultation with the bipartisan leadership of the United States Congress and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
And I'm also struck that the President-elect Joe Biden, as well as George W. Bush, both called this an insurrection. And an insurrection usually involves more organization and military planning than this. But there was planning. I looked on the website of this organization to stop the steal, to bring this protest, which was organized primarily by Women for Trump, is the primary organizing avenue among many others. I imagine that's just a fundraising vehicle for that particular group. But it was an organized rally with a full speech planned at 11 o'clock by the president as well as other supporters, and a national park permit as well.
Yeah, and then they marched up the street, and somebody had to bring along that large Trump banner that was hanging briefly from the west front of the Capitol, so clearly it was organized.
I wonder, I see Chris Van Cleve there, who is being pushed back along with others. I wonder, Chris, are you able to hear us and describe what's happening?
Yes. Well, Nora, you know, we are past the point where the D.C. curfew has gone into effect, and now this is D.C. police, largely, that are moving people back. You know, and it's been similar to what we have seen in past protests here in D.C., where they'll draw a line, they'll mass up, and then you'll start hearing them move back, and they'll establish a new perimeter line. And here we go, here again, more move back, and that's what's happening here. Is the D.C. police are walking people away from the Capitol. Hey, Mass, we need to go this way here. You're going to hit a fence. Yep. We're moving back here, further back from the Capitol. You know, these sort of things are pretty commonplace in D.C. where there's a demonstration and D.C. police need to move people around. You know, it's basically every day of the week there's somebody yelling at a building in Washington. So this sort of thing is actually what the D.C. police know how to do. They do it very well, and they are moving the Trump supporters. Mass, you can see there are still some of the Trump flags and things up ahead here that we're walking towards as we're being moved along by the D.C. police.
And where are you right now, Chris?
National Guard, the D.C. Sure. So we are. We're right at First and what would be First and Delaware or so, right by the reflecting pond that's in front of the west front of the Capitol.
They haven't gone far.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's still pretty close to the
Jefferson.
Capitol. Got it. Still pretty close to the Capitol, but certainly backed off of the perimeter, no doubt.
Yes, absolutely. And the crowd has gotten smaller, Nora. I think that's important to note. The D.C. National Guard are on scene here. We have people in military uniforms with shields that are part of this law enforcement action that's pushing these demonstrators back further away from the Capitol. We're walking towards the National Mall now and the Native American Museum. It has certainly been a remarkable day here. You know, it was quite a sight when I was thinking back on this. You know, as we got out here, it was a big rally, and then when we got down to the West Front, we were looking at people scaling the scaffolding up to the area where the inauguration will be. That then led to people breaching the Capitol. And we know that once people got inside, that turned deadly, where a woman lost her life after being shot inside the Capitol. And just some remarkable images of Capitol Police barricading the House chamber and with their guns drawn as people were apparently attempting to get inside the House chamber where members of Congress were working. You know, and it has continued for hours
Chris,
now. I want to draw your attention here, Nora. You see there's yes, Nora, sorry.
Well, the D.C. curfew is now in effect until 6 a.m. And as law enforcement is pushing back those protesters, is there any indication that they're saying to them, if you don't disperse now, you will be arrested?
They have not. I have not heard the "you will be arrested" warning yet. What we've seen over the summer when D.C.'s curfew was in effect was you would have an effort to push the crowd back to get people to disperse, and then you'll end up with sort of a core group of hangers-on. That's then when you would start to hear the police say, if you don't disperse, you will be arrested. They normally give that warning 2 or 3 times before they move in and make the arrest. So far, I have not heard that announcement, just a lot of move back, and then, of course, you've got the line of officers with shields and things, which is a pretty good incentive to move. So, and so far, that's what they're doing. They're pushing the crowd back towards Pennsylvania Avenue, back towards the White House very slowly.
Chris Van Cleve, thank you for your excellent reporting and right there on the ground in what is clearly a dangerous and developing situation. So thank you, Chris, for that, as he is being, of course, disparaged by some who are out there and is trying to let us know exactly what is happening. You know, we had part of this conversation about leadership. and the Republican leader in the House having to call the White House and say, Mr. President, you need to address, you need to make this end, you need to make this stop. And then the president responding with what some would call a confusing taped message in which he actually praised some of the reporters and then told them to go home. We've now had the acting Secretary of Defense put out a statement that leaves out the President of the United States saying about bringing in the National Guard. And now, Ed, we've heard from the President's National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, who has also tweeted out a statement. This is, of course, a principal advisor to the President of the United States in the White House. If you've ever been in the White House, the National Security Advisor is just right there not far from the Oval Office.
Not far at all.
And
he's actually put out a few different statements here. He said, I spoke with Vice President Pence. He's a genuinely fine and decent man. He exhibited courage today, as he did at the Capitol on 9/11 as a congressman. I am proud to serve with him. In a later tweet, the White House National Security Advisor, who reports to the president, said, I have spoken with members of the Senate. They want to return to America's Senate chamber and conduct the people's business. This desire is in the finest tradition of our republic. God bless the Congress. Why this is notable is because
the implication,
he's starting to imply things here.
The implication is that the conversations are no longer involving the President of the United States about managing and diffusing the situation.
Right.
There is no other conclusion you can come to from the statement from the acting Secretary of Defense and now the National Security Advisor, that conversations within the highest level of the executive branch are not being conducted by the President to deal with this situation, to resolve it, to de-escalate it, and to let the Congress get back to its appointed legal business. That is significant. They are implications only, but they are quite clear, quite clear.
Hey, Chris.
And it's worth, I think, noting the statement just released by Senator Mitt Romney of Utah. This goes to our conversation a moment ago, Ed, about these senators like Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, and others who may want to continue to object. I'll read directly from Senator Romney's statement. I ask my colleagues, do we weigh our own political fortunes more heavily than we weigh the strength of our republic, the strength of our democracy, and the cause of freedom? What is the weight of personal acclaim compared to the weight of conscience?
Let me convey something a little more urgent. The Speaker of the House has just conveyed to her colleagues in a letter, in consultation with the House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, the House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn, and this is notable, after calls to the Pentagon, the Justice Department, and the Vice President, the Speaker says, we have decided we should proceed tonight at the Capitol once it is cleared for use. Leader Hoyer will be sending out more guidance later today. So the headline there is the House will resume consideration of the Electoral College results tonight, according to the House Speaker, who says she's consulted with her colleagues, with the Pentagon, with the Justice Department, and notably the Vice President, who, of course, today is serving as the presider, not the decider, and leads the Senate ceremoniously. So that is a signal that it will happen. She adds, today, January 6th, the Feast of the Epiphany. Let us pray that this instigation to violence will provide an epiphany for our country to heal. And she urges members and staff to stay at the complex until the U.S. Capitol Police tell them it's safe to move on.
Another part of this worth noting, we always knew, this is the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, this responsibility would take us into the night. The night may still be long, but we are hopeful for a shorter agenda. But our purpose will be accomplished. That is a suggestion that the number of states that might be objected to is narrowing or will be narrowed, and that this will be accomplished more rapidly than originally contemplated. Fair reading of that, it seems to me.
All right, and we're witnessing now at this hour the efforts by law enforcement to remove the mob from Capitol Hill, to get them to disperse, as the D.C. Capitol is still under lockdown but is secure at this hour, and both President-elect Joe Biden and George W. Bush calling this an insurrection. And it is 6:30 in the east, 3:30 in the west. And for those of you who are just joining us, this is a special report of the CBS Evening News. We are witnessing history and what can only be described as a national disgrace. As we come on the air, the U.S. Capitol is under lockdown after violent mobs, stoked and encouraged by the words of President Trump and his allies, stormed the building while the House and Senate were in session. They were meeting to count the votes of the Electoral College. Supporters of President Trump carrying flags with his name on them broke down doors, smashed windows, and attacked police. Some briefly invaded the Senate chamber. At this hour, at least one person has died. Others have been injured, and at least 2 suspected explosive devices have been disabled. All of this because President Trump has refused to accept that he lost the election and has falsely told his supporters that it was stolen from him. The process to count the electoral ballots has been halted. Right now, Washington, D.C. is under a mandatory curfew, and police and the National Guard are trying to restore order. It has been an extraordinary day. Congressional leaders have pleaded for President Trump to call off the protesters. Late today, he did tweet a video in which he repeated his false claims that the election was stolen from him, and he called on protesters to go home. President-elect Biden also spoke, and actually spoke before the President of the United States, saying that our democracy is under unprecedented assault. He also said America is so much better than this. At this moment, we are told that the Capitol building has been secured and that the counting of electoral votes may continue later tonight. We have a team covering all of this. I want to go back to CBS's Chris Van Cleve, who is just outside the Capitol and has been amidst it all day. Good evening, Chris.
Nora, the remaining protesters are squaring off with a line of police and National Guard in the street outside of the Capitol. This is a much calmer scene than earlier today, and I think we need to back up to that point when demonstrators among the tens of thousands of people that were outside the Capitol climbed onto the scaffolding that's out in front of the Capitol where the inauguration will take place, and then were able to breach the Capitol building itself. That escalated what had been a peaceful demonstration into something we hadn't seen in American history, really. We can show you some video. People breached the Capitol. Once inside, there was a shooting. We understand now a woman has died. There are also some striking photos as both houses of Congress were in session, the House and the Senate. The Vice President was there. Multiple people in the line of succession were in the building. That forced both houses of Congress to be locked down. Capitol Police had their guns out, directed at the doors as people outside attempted to get inside. We watched as members of Congress were evacuated, one in a gas mask. Listen to what David Trone, a representative from Maryland, a Democrat, had to say.
And it was time to move fast, and everybody moved very quickly, very orderly, out the doors, into the elevators, into the tunnels. Then we got routed around till we came up in a secure location, and we're sending bottles of water in, and we're waiting for directions.
We have seen flashbangs be used. We have seen tear gas and pepper spray be used. We've also seen demonstrators throw smoke at police. Now, right now, we are seeing D.C. is under a curfew. These people are violating the D.C. curfew. They have not been told to go home yet, but the Capitol Police, the Metropolitan Police, the D.C. Police, the National Guard have been moving them further and further away from the Capitol. We are now standing in the street about a block and a half from the Capitol, where the remaining demonstrators are lined up facing police in riot gear. Nora?
Chris Van Cleve, amidst it all. An extraordinary day on Capitol Hill. CBS's Nancy Cordes covers Congress for us. She was inside the Capitol when the mobs began storming in. And I understand, Nancy, we have just heard some breaking news from the Speaker of the House.
That's right, Nora. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has sent a letter to her colleagues arguing that she thinks it's time to get back to the work that was interrupted earlier today when the Capitol was breached. She says in this letter that she has consulted with other leaders, along with the Pentagon, the Justice Department, and the Vice President, and that she has decided that they should proceed tonight at the Capitol once it is cleared for use. And we should be getting more guidance later today about where this will take place. Will it go back to being in the House chamber or some other location? Will the Vice President come back to Capitol Hill, because he's an integral part of this process of ratifying the Electoral College votes and confirming that President-elect Joe Biden was indeed the winner and will be sworn in on January 20th. This was a very frightening day for lawmakers who normally feel incredibly secure in this building. It has multiple layers of security, but this is what it looked like today. This is the first time that the U.S. Capitol has been breached in more than 200 years, Nora. The War of 1812, when it was set ablaze infamously by the British. And perhaps most frighteningly, the House and Senate chambers were locked down once the mob got inside to keep the members who were inside the chambers safe. And yet protesters managed to get into the Senate chamber anyway, and they nearly got into the House chamber. There was a standoff with police, and we even saw one protester who made it into the office of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Some of these lawmakers who were sent to secure areas to shelter in place for hours are still there. Some of them have sent out essentially proof of life videos to tell their friends and their constituents that they are okay. Others urged President Trump to come out more forcefully and denounce this crowd. Take a listen to what they had to say in their own words.
We were just told that there has been tear gas in the rotunda, and we're being instructed to each of us get gas masks that are under our seats.
This is banana republic crap. Mr. President, you have got to stop this.
Well, I'm proud of America, but I'm not proud of this. It's extremely disturbing. It's not what you'd expect in the great country of America.
One big question tonight, will the Republican lawmakers who had been gearing up to challenge the Electoral College results in multiple states back down now that we have seen so much unrest today? We know that those lawmakers have been meeting to discuss this, whether they're going to back down entirely or perhaps pare back the number of states that they want to challenge. And we won't know exactly what's going to happen next, Nora, when they're going to resume until those lawmakers have made their decision and conveyed it to the House Speaker and to the Senate's Republican leader, Mitch McConnell.
You described how lawmakers almost fearful for their lives, for their safety on Capitol Hill, to see the sergeant of arms directing the Capitol Police with guns drawn to protect the House floor there, and hearing from Senator Tammy Duckworth today that a quick-thinking aide decided to gather the electoral votes, which now I understand are in that secure location with the lawmakers?
That's right. And so if this process resumes again tonight, they will continue going over those for certification documents and one by one confirming that either Joe Biden or Donald Trump won various states and then counting up those votes. Nora, this is normally a routine process. 4 years ago, it lasted 35 minutes. And the person who was presiding at that time, 4 years ago, was none other than Vice President Joe Biden. When Democrats tried to challenge the results like Republicans did today, he shut it down. He said the debate is over, the race is over, the time for debate has passed. Obviously, these Republican lawmakers are getting a very different message from President Trump, who says that the race isn't over at all and that, in fact, he won in a landslide despite all the evidence to the contrary.
All right, Nancy Cordes on Capitol Hill with some extraordinary reporting. Thank you. Want to bring in Major Garrett and Ed O'Keefe. And Major, we heard from President-elect Joe Biden when there was a vacuum in leadership, when all we could see in the country and the world could see was a mob riot, scaling the walls of the citadel of liberty, the United States Capitol. It was the President-elect Joe Biden who addressed the nation to say that this is an unprecedented assault on democracy.
Correct. And he said the president's words matter. A bad president or a good president. Always the words matter. They can inspire or they can incite. And let us be absolutely clear. The linkage between the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and this violence, this grotesque, lawless spectacle of the United States Capitol is direct. There is no ambiguity about that. The president, mere moments before this happened, said in a speech to these very people that the election was stolen and that they had to do something about it. And the warm-up speakers went even farther than that. So the connective tissue between the president's rhetoric, his attitude about this election, his repeated falsehoods about what did happen when it was the most scrutinized, transparent, and well-conducted election in American history, has created not just the atmosphere, but the motive and the intention that played out so malignantly in the United States Capitol today.
Ed?
You know, there have been instances like this at the Capitol in recent years. There was a shooting situation in 2013. There was the shooting at the baseball practice in 2017 involving many members. But never before, as Nancy said, in the modern age had we seen something quite like this. Perhaps just that 1998 shooting involving 2 officers there. And never during such an important moment in the transition of power and for American democracy. This is supposed to be the capstone of the 2020 election. This was it. This is the official finale. And what a way for it to end. And I think it's somewhat, it's terrifying, it's disappointing, it's heartbreaking. Heartbreaking is the word I've heard over and over again today from Democrats, Republicans, from people checking in across the country who are just learning of what was going on. It's just heartbreaking.
We started this day talking about what was, in some ways, a civil war going on within the Republican Party, because that bitterness, that division that has been apparent in Georgia led the party to lose 2 Senate seats. As CBS News has now declared that the Democrats won both of those Senate runoffs, handing the Democratic Party 50 seats in the United States Senate that will allow Kamala Harris to be the tiebreaker. That has enormous legislative implications, also for who Biden can choose as his appointees. It was what conservatives, what Wall Street business executives were so threatened by, worried about, that now Democrats essentially control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And that really changes so much about this town. And yet, the blame being placed on the President of the United States, and some lawmakers are deciding to stick with him, and then others deciding it's the end of the Trump era.
We've spent much of the last 2 years talking about divisions within the Democratic Party. Ideological, stylistic, generational, gender, racial, nothing as profound as this. There is a total cleavage now in the Republican Party because this was such a profound demonstration of anti-democratic behavior today at the Capitol with the world watching. And I wonder now what on earth the Republican conversation is like. There will be some serious conversation, official conversation with Republican leaders because they're supposed to be meeting this week in Florida, Georgia for their winter meeting to figure out party leadership and how you move off this current cycle into the next ones. And you just wonder if those conversations can even continue. One other just bit of news that's come through here. The Senate Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer, telling reporters a little while ago, 8 o'clock when asked what's next. He said 8 o'clock. Not entirely clear, but that would suggest that perhaps they're going to go back into session in the Senate in about an hour and 20 minutes.
All right. And part of that effort then and the Capitol will be secured by the National Guard. CBS News has reported that the Army is activating the entire District of Columbia National Guard, 1,100 troops in response to this request from Mayor Bowser. That being announced from the Pentagon, the acting secretary, noting that that was made in consultation with the vice president and leaders of Congress. Notably absent from that conversation was President Trump, which has raised eyebrows. But it looks now like this is going to move forward on the Capitol. There's still a lot of activity on the streets of D.C., despite the fact that the curfew has been in place for some 45 minutes now. So let's bring in CBS News Chief Justice and Homeland Security correspondent Jeff Pegues. And Jeff, I know you've been there all day. What have you learned from talking to people in the crowd?
Well, most of the people have cleared the scene, and that is good news, obviously, for the National Guard that is set up here behind me, keeping the crowd that is left back from the Capitol. But since early this morning, President Trump supporters have gathered in D.C. They walked down Constitution Avenue to the ellipse where President Trump had called them for this rally today. You know, the law enforcement here and D.C. Homeland Security officials expecting tens of thousands of people. But this was a massive crowd, and it filled the ellipse. And as Major Garrett alluded to, there were speeches, including Rudy Giuliani, who talked about trial by combat. And there were other words that inspired this crowd to walk toward this Capitol today, and that's exactly what they did. Even as President Trump was in the middle of his speech, we saw people turning and walking away and heading toward the Capitol. I asked one woman, well, where are you going? And she said, I'm heading toward the Capitol. The speech has inspired me. And so once we got here to the Capitol, you heard people encouraging other Trump supporters to storm the Capitol, to breach the Capitol. In fact, there was a woman with a bullhorn who was telling people to do just that.
We need more men up at the Capitol. We need 80 men at a time to go through the tear gas.
Hey, excuse me, what are you asking for?
80 men. To take our property, to take our property back. We the people own this property.
And so I confronted her. I was asking her why she was encouraging people to breach the Capitol when law enforcement at that point, they were trying to keep people back. But she was telling people we have a job to do, and she was among a group of people here intent on breaching this Capitol today. But as I said, law enforcement right now, they have the situation under control. We've seen law enforcement move in, including the National Guard, and they are behind us right now, keeping order on the streets as this curfew is set in. Nora.
Jeff Pegues, thank you so much, and want to bring in Ed O'Keefe and Major Garrett, because what we saw today was an extraordinary effort to try and delay or actually thwart what was a process that was to take place within a matter of hours. And now Speaker Pelosi says, you know, we were planning to do it tonight, and we're still going to do it tonight. They're trying to send a message that this is going to happen no matter what.
Moments ago, our viewers saw a tweet from Senator Jeff Merkley, the Democrat from Oregon, talking about the preservation, the quick-minded and quick-witted preservation of the electoral votes and the envelopes in which they were sent to the Capitol. He said in his tweet, if they had not been preserved, the mob would have burned them. So let's be clear about what this is, an attempted mob rule to not only intimidate the United States Congress, but from the perspective of one Democratic member of the Senate, with the intent to burn the evidence of a duly conducted presidential election in this country, with the intense purpose to nullify its results. That is what we're talking about here. That's the consequence we are at least imagining if this thing had gone to the next level. The level it achieved is already repugnant and repellent in our history, but it could have been worse, and from this senator's tweet, much worse than any of us could have theorized, even 6 hours ago.
I mean, yeah, there are other copies of these results, but the symbolism of having done that would have been profound, and clearly...
It's not as if they couldn't have been replicated, but the intent of that and all that it carries with it.
Yeah, every state's required to make 6 copies for a reason, and, you know, but the symbolism would have been terrible, and kudos to that quick-thinking aide who, you know, is already Employee of the Year.
And it's also worth noting that the president has denounced his vice president for not being courageous enough to uphold what he wants him to do, which is nullify the election, exercising power he under the Constitution and federal law does not possess. Talking about a cleavage within the Republican Party, it exists in the West Wing.
It exists in the line of succession, in essence, tonight.
Yes, it does.
And the fact that we've seen some Trump administration officials put out statements in coordination with congressional leaders.
Speaking of the vice president exercising authority and not the president,
is a sign of how significant today may have been. Things we have not yet learned.
Today marks also 2 weeks until the presidential inauguration of Joe Biden as the 46th president of the United States, that was set to take place on the west front of the Capitol in the era of coronavirus. So it had already been sparsely attended. And today we saw that mob essentially take the seats there as a symbolic effort and hang the flag of Trump 2020 there. That has since been removed, and the process will move forward. But we did see a moment of presidential leadership today, because while President Trump was doing something, we saw President-elect Joe Biden come forward live and address the nation, calling this a disgraceful insurrection. Let's listen.
This is not dissent. It's disorder. It's chaos. It borders on sedition. And it must end. now.
And a strong message there from the president-elect. And you mentioned this, Major. He talked about words being very important, that in some cases they can inspire. In worst cases, they can incite. And there are both calls from Republican and Democratic lawmakers laying the blame squarely on the president of the United States and his supporters, including Rudy Giuliani and his son, Don Jr., for inciting this violence. And then only after watching the fruition of their words, their marching orders take effect, did they try and tweet out trying to bring it all back.
Yeah, we didn't mean this. We meant the election was stolen. We meant something needed to be done about it, but we didn't mean this. Well, do you think Trump supporters who carried out this action today understood or even pondered that distinction at any level? The quite obvious answer to that is no. And when you play with rhetorical fire, you will be burned. And many, many people in this country have said for months, if not years, that this rhetoric is incendiary and it will get out of control. We saw a manifestation of that today.
All I keep thinking is the message Joe Biden's been delivering over the last 2 years has been remarkably consistent. What words and actions of a president matter. The world is watching us and wondering what the heck we're doing. We've got to get rid of President Trump. It's been remarkably consistent, and every time he has to come out and say it, it seems to be with far more consequence. And today he had to rip up his plans and address this because he realized that there was a vacuum, as you said, a vacuum of leadership in the moment.
And part of his mission, as he said, is to try to begin the process of restoring some measure of, in his words, decency, honor, and respect among Americans for Americans.
All right, you've heard the president-elect, Joe Biden, mention the word sedition. We'll talk more about what that could mean when we come back. We're going to take a quick break. We'll have more of our special coverage here on the CBS Evening News.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lana Zak. You've been watching a special CBS News report covering the violent protests that have been unfolding in Washington today. An angry mob stormed the U.S. Capitol building, disrupting the Electoral College vote count. Lawmakers were rapidly evacuated after demonstrators breached the Senate chamber. D.C. is now under curfew, and the National Guard has been activated. At least one person has died. I'm going to take you back now to my colleagues, Nora O'Donnell, Major Garrett, Ed O'Keefe, and our CBS News special report.
And what some would describe as a disgraceful day on Capitol Hill as a mob stormed the Capitol, forcing a lockdown and forcing lawmakers into a secure situation that one lawmaker described to us as a potential super spreader event, as hundreds of them have been packed inside a secure area for almost 3-4 hours as they await the law enforcement to secure the United States Capitol. I mentioned that word sedition that President-elect Trump mentioned. I want to bring in David Becker on that very legal point because he is our election law effort, and talk about those comments today that have been raised about sedition and seditious activity on those who incited this violence.
Yeah, so sedition basically means any activity or conduct that seeks to overcome legal authority, particularly in a democracy. And I think there's a very good case to be made that we've seen activity like that, and that certainly is criminal. It comes with very serious penalties, and it's something, you know, when you see activity that is designed to usurp the natural and peaceful transition of power to a lawful individual, in this case the president-elect, who won an election that wasn't particularly close. That's the kind of thing we're looking at in that case. It's a very serious term and something we should be very concerned about.
David Becker noting, of course, that charge of seditious conspiracy that has been leveled against some. I want to also bring in Nancy Cordes, who is on Capitol Hill, with some new information about what we're going to see tonight. Nancy?
Nora, we're just learning that the Senate is going to resume counting and debating the Electoral College results at 8 p.m. Eastern Time tonight, as senators have been huddling in a secure area in a room in an office building of the Capitol for hours now. Reporters have been holed up there as well. And one of our colleagues, Grace Seegers, who has been there, says that they've just been told that the senators are going to walk back over to the Capitol around 7 o'clock, and they're going to pick back up where they left off at 8 p.m. Keep in mind where we were when all of this went down. A joint session of Congress had been initiated by the Vice President of the United States in his role as the presiding officer of the Senate, and there was an objection to the results from one of the states, Arizona. And when that happens, the House and the Senate break apart. They go to their respective chambers and they conduct 2 hours of debate about that objection. And that is where we were when the protesters, demonstrators managed to make it into the Capitol and everything went sideways. And so the Senate is now saying that they're going to pick back up at 8 o'clock and continue that debate. The question is, will any Republican senators who are planning to challenge not just Arizona, but possibly as many as a half a dozen battleground state results decide that they don't want to do that anymore in light of all the very strong emotions that were stirred up here on Capitol Hill and around the country today? That's what we're waiting to find out. We already know that at least one House Republican, Kathy McMorris Rodgers of Washington State, who had been on the list to challenge some of these states, now says she's not going to. She says that that would disenfranchise voters from around the country, and she's going to go ahead and certify and ratify the results from these various states. So we haven't gotten word yet, Nora, about when the House is going to resume, but the Senate, we're being told, is going to pick back up in about an hour.
And Nancy, you have just so clearly laid out what we are going to see and the drama that still awaits us this evening, because the question is whether those Republican members of Congress will walk back what President George W. Bush has called reckless behavior in objecting to what he called the constitutionally mandated meeting of Congress.
One of the things that the senators who agreed to the objections said was, we need to object because so many people are angry about this election. They've been angered by this election, about this election, by falsehoods perpetrated and repeated by the President of the United States. That anger can be dealt with, but their response is to say, I must yield to it. Well, they have yielded to it, and it has yielded this result. And they now have a constitutional and political decision to make. Having seen the results of that which you yielded to, can you live with yourself? Can you live, as Mitt Romney, one of their colleagues, Republican from Utah, said, your conscience? The question looms.
And I just have to keep quoting the former president because I think he wanted so badly to avoid this moment. He said yesterday he would be attending the inauguration of Joe Biden. I think he cares deeply about the institutions of not only the presidency, but Congress, and said that insurrection could do grave damage to our nation and reputation. Have the institutions here in Washington face that damage today?
To some extent, yes. But let's see how things go once they reconvene tonight, how quickly it's handled, how respectfully, and the message it'll send to the world that there may have been a disruption, but they're getting back to the business of American democracy.
Ed O'Keefe and Major Garrett, thank you. We're going to take another quick break. Our coverage of the assault on the U.S. Capitol continues in just a moment.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lana Zak. You have been watching a CBS News special report after rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol building in Washington today. An angry mob overturned barricades, battled with police, broke windows, all disrupting the Electoral College vote count. Lawmakers were forced into hiding in secure locations after demonstrators breached the Senate chamber. D.C. is now under a curfew, and the National Guard has been activated. At least one person has died. Others have been injured, and at least 2 suspected explosive devices have been found and disabled. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle have called the violence un-American. In a taped message, President Trump again falsely claimed to win the election, but called on protesters to go home after earlier encouraging them to march to the Capitol. President-elect Joe Biden called it an insurrection. We're going to take you back now to my colleagues Nora O'Donnell, Major Garrett, and Ed O'Keefe, and our CBS News special report.
And welcome back to our CBS News special coverage, where we are following an extraordinary day here in Washington, the U.S. Capitol, the citadel of democracy.
Come on, line! Line this way! A line! Come on! Come on, line! Make a line. You better fight through, you're going to get killed.
And forgive us our trespasses, we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil that has surrounded this country and the world. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Did you just leave or what? You guys closing this area down? Every other
Hey, I need you all to take 2 steps back. 2 steps back.
Every other person turn around and monitor the rear. Every other person.
Can I leave? I was leaving.
They are trying to buckle up in the left side.
Check one.
For violating a made-up curfew.
What's the curfew? We'll be out. I'm trying to get away from you. We're not letting people out right now. We're not letting people out right now. You stand ahead of time. Oh, stretch around. You got a hook.
No, that's what I so that works. These guys are going to get around. Step back, close down there. Step back. I'm not going to take it. Hey, that's step back. You're right up with my officer. Step back. All of this? Step back, sir.
You want to go, keep it moving. You want to get out, keep going.
Stretch it out, nobody else.
Make the line.
Make a line. I'm going to leave you to get out of your hair. I would be happy to get out of your hair.
You know that charger that you got with 30% APR that you guys are fucking idiots that have no other life choice other than joining our jury? A lot of evil has been perpetrated under the phrase just following orders. Just following orders. A lot of evil has been perpetrated under just following orders.
Let us switch so we can charge. Oh!
Don't let them water!
I mean, I'm inclined to negotiate.
who I'm also an elder and a witness of the suffering of the saints. Subject one to another, and be clothed with humility. For God resisteth the proud, and giveth grace to the humble. Humble yourselves therefore under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour, whom he is steadfast in faith. Knowing that the same person bears conflict and pleasure of all knowledge, that the God of all grace, who hath called us under his eternal glory by Christ Jesus, after that we have suffered the wrong, Matthew 7.
Oh, Daryl! Daryl, do you know what I want you to do? I want you to call Bill Harding, and I want you to bring it there. Yeah, in his truck, because that'll be the easiest way. Otherwise, we're constantly moving. Do you want me to send you his number? Okay. Or I can, hold on. Oh, okay. 1 second. 202. 802. What do we think here? Let's keep going. What is it? Okay, thank you so much. Bye. So I was coordinating the all-important sandwich delivery. They just said, quote, "We're trying to get guidance on everything right now. We have no guidance."
We should.
Hanging out here. My thought is that hanging out for a little longer. They're warning us again about what?
Curfew.
Does everyone have trespasses? You don't, right? I sympathize for the other two, but also after 9:30 a.m. What? It's true. I think Chip was out here at some point. Yeah. I don't know what happened to him. We've been out here before. I just told him. I said, reminder, our crew has been here 3:30 a.m. Yeah. Yeah, you guys even eat?
I haven't.
I have cereal bars, by the way, while I was talking. Hello. No, don't even apologize. I'm glad you guys got out. We're like further down the line because otherwise we're going to get quite late. I'm just trying to get officers back to the truck because we've been out here since 3:30, Julia. And we've run out of external batteries, like we said, and right, that's helpful. So we can't go to the car over there? Yeah.
We should go that way towards the car. Let's go outside.
Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah. We're moving. We're just trying to stay away from trouble. But we'll keep you posted. Okay. Bye.
So the Pride Rallies are going to be basically at the, Black Lives Matter Plaza and
Yeah.
Freedom Plaza there. So
The Senate was just given the clear that they could return to the.
Somebody. He can't run.
I don't know exactly where. Can you hold this? John, can you hold this?
Call your family and friends at home. We need everybody in D.C. and we need all citizens.
Stop. Stop. Aaron is giving weird directions. He's like that they're on the last street. They're on the left of the Capitol. Maybe they're up there.
I suspect they're in Louisiana. I don't think they could have got it on Constitution. That looks
I don't
it's-
think they could get down yet.
Yeah. It's not coming through right now either. Figure out the building, man. Have they just completely collapsed? Are there still people in the middle? Yeah. The answer to that question is no.
When we're done trying to figure out where they are, I think we're going to go over there and see if we can get it, because that'll be the shot. Looking for the
I
wagon.
think they're over there.
You think so?
I think they're over here.
Let's go into the park here and see if we can see them being loaded into wagons.
You want to walk up that? You want to walk up that sidewalk?
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's do that.
The park is muddy.
Hey, we're gonna walk through the park up to Louisiana and First. So we are. Okay, mine's not sending it to you. There's like so many people here. But if you're near lights, I think we're headed in the right direction. Because there aren't any lights near us. We're at like the end of the parking lot. So.
Hey, cutie. Oh, you have my phone.
Yeah. Okay, I lost you because I gotta.
Hey, Beck.
What?
Let me hold it for you. I'm sorry. I just noticed you trying to do your phone at the same time. I got it.
Okay.
You want to hold it right here? Okay.
Oh, do you know where they are, or you just?
No, I'm good, baby.
Okay, I lost it because of the emergency.
It's got no link there.
Man, I still can't really see into there.
So is he in Louisiana?
There's a location. They're in Pence. Are you sitting next to a police officer? No.
Which one?
Are you behind?
I think that's him. Yeah.
Yep, I see you. He's like, what do you need?
What'd you say? Yeah. That was for the reinforcements, but I'm looking for the wagons too, because they're gonna be loading people up.
Hand warmers too? I can use hand warmers.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Oh, sorry about that. Keep hitting you. I can't see anymore. Hey y'all, how are ya?
Reinforcements, sir. You're here. We got through all the crazy battle stuff. Oh, you got bodyguard and everything, huh? We ain't got shit. That's why they're keeping us in the car. You know, man. I see. I ain't leaving. Yo, just,
Oh, no, I'm
real talk.
fine.
To get to space, there was a dude in the car, and I was like, Charlotte, see if you let us park there. I'm like, but it's you. I reclined back, and he's like, oh yeah, you can take it. He moved back to the car. I came right back up. I mean, because it was different. I mean, it was a lot different.
I'm trying to figure out how y'all even got right here.
That is really impressive.
Yeah.
So we must have got here like as soon as they pushed out, like literally, because everybody was all here.
Right.
They're I don't know if I'm seeing that right. They got batons?
Oh yeah, that's full ride gear.
Yeah. That's the same that they had back there, right?
Huh?
That's the same that they had back there.
A little bit. We had
But where's the battery you need charged though? You know what I'm saying?